Hello, my name's Gary Ford, Managing Director of Tiger Hobbies Limited, UK hobby imports and distributors, and welcome to episode 5, 1944, the Red Army on the attack. By the summer of 44, the Germans were really up against it. In the west, the Allies were storming onto the Normandy beaches, opening up the long last the Second Front. In the Soviet Union, Marshal Zhukov was poised to strike right at the heart of German Army Group Centre. By 1944, the Red Army were assembled in massive fronts, or what they call their army groups. 1st and 2nd Belarusian Front, and just below him, Marshal Konev's 1st Ukrainian Front. There were also Baltic fronts and Leningrad fronts. But the Belarusian and Ukrainian fronts were by far the largest, and they had the task of striking towards Berlin. Early in Operation Barbarossa in 1941, the German tank formations reported meeting a new tank not seen before, the T-34. In this case, the early T-34 76. It was fast, reliable and well armed with a 76mm gun and came with effective sloping armour and wide tracks. It could cope with ground that German tanks could not. Huge numbers were captured as the Red Army used poor tactics and the Germans pressed them into service. But by 1943, thought it was outclassed by the later models of the Panzer IV and the larger Tigers and Panthers, so a new version would be needed. The new T-43 Universal tank to replace both T-34 and the heavier KV-1 was cancelled. The Soviets went for an upgraded version of the T-34. Hull remained almost the same, apart from a much larger turret ring to enable a larger 3-man turret. The new tank had thicker frontal armour and a large high-velocity 85mm gun. The tank was produced in vast numbers and continued to serve well after the war. We're now going to look at Operation Bagration, or Bagration, in more detail. Operation Bagration would be named after Prince Bagration, a Georgian and hero of the Imperial Army during the War of 1812, who led his men with bravery and determination during the Battle of Borodino and looked on as Russia's best general. Stalin personally chose the name as Stalin himself was a Georgian. Bagration was wounded and later died during the Battle of Borodino. But the battle was kind of a draw, but the French were drained of men, losing up to 30,000 dead and wounded. Operation Bagration is often overshadowed by Operation Overlord, but was one of the biggest single offences of the war and the greatest Red Army victory of the war, also the greatest German defeat in their military history. Behind me is a map on the Eastern Front in June of 1944. In blue is the object of Bagration, and you can see that the Ukrainian front pushes out further west. The Germans had suffered a number of defeats in the Southern Front and expected that the Red Army to push even further out of the Ukraine. Hence, German Army Group Centre was under orders to send vast amounts of men, equipment, further south. This included 80% of its own tank force. The German intelligence was completely sure that the main Soviet offensive in 1944 would hit the German-Ukrainian front. The objective of Bagration was to kick the Germans out of the borders of the pre-Soviet Union and destroy German Army Group Centre. The Red Army were using the term Moskova, or I think it's Moskova, or camouflage as it's known, used a deception to make sure the Germans still thought the attack would come in the south, while they built up massive forces behind the Belarusian front. The Red Army had 1.7 million men for the offensive, nearly 6,000 tanks, many of them new T-34-85. This was backed up by 32,000 artillery guns. The German army on the run, Army Group Centre, was down to less than 600 tanks, about 300,000 men. The commanding general of Army Group Centre would not listen to his commanders about pulling back to a better line of defence, as they knew what was coming and they knew they would be smashed. Before the offensive began, partisans all around the target area started to cause maximum trouble, blowing up thousands of charges on railways and lines of communication. There were over 100,000 partisans operating behind the German lines in the areas that Bagration would be punching through. On the 22nd of June 1944, exactly 3 years after the start of Operation Barbarossa, the Red Army launched Operation Bagration. In the north, from the Baltic front, was probing attacks, followed up by massive aerial bombing. But they were surprised. The Germans literally just collapsed. In the next 24 hours, the main attacks would go in. First from the 2nd and 3rd Belarusian fronts, followed by the 24th of June 1944 by Zhukov's own 1st Belarusian front. The accompanying artillery bombardment was the largest of World War II, but they concentrated on certain key areas of the front to enable the infantry to smash their way through and secure gaps in the German defences. Within 24 hours, the city of Verbresk was surrounded and the German 53rd Corps was cut off and was not even allowed to retreat, even though it was fully aware of its miserable predicament. On the 27th of June, another town, Babrusk, was surrounded and the Germans lost another 2 corps. And the Red Army were being very flexible, giving its commanders the right to break through the line if they saw the opportunity. All along the front, Red Army units were breaking through with massive, overwhelming force. Hitler refused any requests to fall back and insisted on Festplatz or strong points. But any Festplatz would be just passed by the Red Army, resulting in huge numbers of Germans being cut off to take no further part in the battle. At the end of June, Hitler sacked Army Group Centre and replaced him with Field Marshal Walter Model, Hitler's fireman, who set up defences along a river to the east of the city of Minsk. The Red Army totally outflanked Minsk to the north and to the south, pushing hard no matter how many casualties suffered, including a massive tank battle to the north of Minsk between the 5th Panzer Division and the 5th Guards Tank Army on the 1st and 2nd of July 1944. The Germans knocked out tank after tank, but the Red Army just kept coming and destroying most of the 5th Panzer Division's tanks. And the Soviets were on the move everywhere, and by the 3rd of July, Minsk was captured and over 100,000 Germans of the 4th Army Group completely cut off east of Minsk. The Red Army had captured so many Germans that on the 17th of July, while the battle was still going on, 57,000 Germans were marched through Moscow in what was called the March of the Vanquished. The Germans expected the Red Army to stop just west of Minsk, maybe due to supply problems, as they had done in the past. But this was the new Red Army. It just kept pushing and pushing, up to 30 kilometres a day, west, with the Germans simply falling back. Within a few weeks, the once mighty German Army Group Centre, the ones that almost got to Moscow in late 1941, were smashed on the battlefields of Belarusia. Towards the end of July, the Red Army was attacking the German North Ukrainian front, and the Germans were expecting this attack, but their forces had been weakened by sending forces back up to Army Group Centre. So again, the Germans were knocked for 6, and by the 1st of August, the Red Army were just east of the Polish city of Warsaw. I'm showing a clip behind me from the movie Warsaw 44. With the Red Army seemingly bounding their way across Poland towards Warsaw, the Polish Home Army started the Warsaw Uprising. Initially took the Germans by surprise, but in a twist of fate, the Red Army stopped just before Warsaw, halted for 40 days. In this time, the Germans counterattacked, took back Warsaw, evacuated the city and razed it to the ground. Stalin wanted a government in Poland leaning towards communism, not the free Polish government in exile in London. Historians think this is one of the great betrayals of World War II and led to the deaths of thousands of Poles and Polish Jews still in the ghetto. The Royal Air Force tried to fly in supplies of food and ammo to the defenders of Warsaw, but this cost them over 40 aircraft. There is no doubt the Red Army, which had advanced hundreds of kilometres in just a matter of months, were now logistically exhausted. But it was not even willing to give help with food and ammo to the Poles in Warsaw, even though they were actually in the eastern suburbs of Warsaw. But they did not care. To them, it was worth the price. Every German was now out of the pre-1941 Soviet Union border, and in some cases well beyond that. Coupled with Operation Overlord, Bagration was the start of the last great push to defeat the Germans. But Operation Bagration could be the greatest military victory in history. but now is overlooked and not really well known, as it was totally overshadowed by Overlord. In episode 6, we shall look at the Red Army's advance to Berlin in April 1945 and the battle for Berlin and the Ruhr pocket in the west.